Healing Horizons, where transformation meets truth. I'm your host, Saima, and today we are joined by Sharon Neilson, an RN with over 30 years in acute care, now a holistic women's wellness coach helping women reclaim their health through emotional clarity and inner nourishment. So, if you have ever felt like your health was slipping through your fingers despite doing all the right things, this episode might be the permission slip your soul's been waiting for. So, Sharon, welcome to the show.
Hello. I should say good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yes, I'm excited too. It's a joy to connect with you here. So Sharon, like from years on the hospital floor to holistic coaching, what I'm really curious to know that what shifted your perspective on the root cause of health issues?
Mm. So it's a very good question, Sienna, because I think that I do really feel within the hospital, and maybe COVID kind of exacerbated the problem, but I do think people's anxieties and overwhelm and sort of that disconnection that they have felt, or that feeling of isolation, has just uh, you know taken an exponential jump. And I it's really interesting that over the years it's kind of been something that I never really kind of appreciated, how benign it can be within someone's life. So in the hospital now, we kind of, my role is as a senior registered nurse. So I work within a surgical team. So I sit as a clinical nurse consultant essentially. And we now go down and we kind of go and see these patients in the emergency department who have come in with general surgery problems. So they may have come with abdominal pain, and women in particular, present with lots of different types of abdominal pain. But if it kind of then comes to a point where they need an operation and then, admission or care, then that's kind of where we come in and we admit them. But the interesting thing that I've found has been really in regard to how complex people's lives are. And, like, we're just seeing them at the surface level. So we're just meeting them for the very first time. We don't know what's been going on other than we see them present in pain. And then we obviously want to take them out of that pain. But often what I've now seen is this unfolding, I guess, of all of the complexity that sits behind that one individual. We do follow up calls with these people. I speak to them about a month after their surgery just to sort of see how they're doing. That's kind of their follow up rather than them coming back to the hospital. And, more and more women talk about the fact that, they're so busy, their families' lives have become very, very complicated. Children, everybody wants to excel. And so therefore,
Mhm.
financially, people are channeling their children into, these higher cost schools, which causes more financial pressure on them. So women are working longer and harder if they have a partner. If they don't have a partner, then, what I'm finding is that they're then giving up different things in order to support their children's education. But I think underlying all of that is this chronic stress that we're sort of like this buzz that we're sitting in. And my concern now is that, healthcare's become quite fragmented, sorry, in that I think, when you go and see a doctor, the doctor kind of wants to diagnose you, put you into a disease process, and then give you some medication. There's no holistic view of, what's actually going on, how long has this been going on, because our nervous system is so intricate within our bodies. And like your previous guest who was talking about, childhood histories and conversations that have been had, and then there's learnt behavior as to how you respond to a
Mhm.
situation. That underlying cause kind of sits as communication to your cells. And so your cells then sort of buzz with whatever that message is, and then continually sort of build on that. So I feel now, even more than ever, that kind of I feel like my role has become quite important from a prevention perspective. Like, I think women are really wanting to be proactive in their healthcare and their own lifestyle, their longevity. We know that we're all living longer, and so we want to be far more functional within that. We want our agility and our energy to sort of keep lasting. And so I think women are trying to do that. But I think the problem is that everything's put into all these different boxes, and it makes it difficult because you're reaching for this and then you're reaching for that. And you're really not sure what the answer is. And so I feel that this is where my benefit, because I have these conversations every day in the emergency department, but because they're in with acute pain, it's not really kind of something that sets with them because they're kind of, their focus is somewhere else. But often we end up talking about their stress levels and what's been going on, and, or they can't stay in hospital because they're the carer of somebody else that has to go home and they haven't been able to find someone to look after them so that they can have their care provided to them. And I would just love to be someone who can support people and have these conversations so that women kind of start to begin to understand that it's so complex and it's not an easy answer. But I think that once you start to take those steps, you can empower yourself and you can become that rudder, I guess, within your own life as to what feels good and what doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's such a powerful shift, Sharon. I mean, you really illustrate how deeply interconnected our experiences and well-being are, and that perspective adds so much depth to the conversation. And I must say that's incredibly moving at the same time. It really, underlines how health is more than just physical symptoms.
Oh yeah, absolutely. um, but it's also, like I think the thing is, the other thing that I now see in the emergency department and is probably felt across the world is this increasing level of mental health. And it's always, I know it gets classified as this unknown paradigm, but the thing is that your mental health is as important, if not more important, than like your cardiac health, for instance, or your gut health and your bones, and because it's the messaging that you're sending to your cells. So, when you've got people who are in a crisis mode, that's a very different conversation to the conversation that I would have with someone who is struggling with overwhelm in life or feeling burnt out, because they just can't, they just don't have that resilience anymore. But I think part of the problem is that we then start to buffer with, food or alcohol, or, in some people's lives, they turn to drugs. And I think that that's when it kind of escalates even further into another realm that is not something that's my specialty. But, I just think that the systems aren't now built to support this. And I don't think even the people that are working within these systems know what the answer is. And,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's really important to have even these conversations where we're at the ground. Someone might be just going for a walk and having a listen to something that might at least be one little glimmer of, what, like maybe that's something I've been going through, and had no actual conscious thought of that, if that makes sense, because it becomes such a normal for them to feel like that. And I think when you go to the GP and you talk about it, the GP just says, oh, yeah, well, life is busy. Maybe you need to take a holiday, which is not untrue, but it's probably not giving them the conversation that they need to have to sort of break it down further. And I think that that's where I feel that my transition is giving that option to people to be able to say, okay, well, if you feel burnt out, why? Let's get to the bottom of this and then start to heal from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, for women, who are constantly caring for others, how can they begin to reclaim control of their own emotional and spiritual well-being? Like, can you share one tiny daily ritual that can start that journey today?
Oh my goodness, yes. So Having been there myself, I have two teenage. Oh well, my daughters aren't quite teenagers. My last one's 18, and the other one is 21. So she's about to turn 22. But I do think that there's, the little things that we can do is actually start to. I know people talk about gratitude, right? And I think that it does get bandied around, but I would like to offer it as something rather than gratitude, other than it's the appreciation of something little in your life that you have that's just for you. So it could be just the fact that you have bought yourself, and it doesn't really matter how much it costs, but maybe it's a shower gel or a soap, for instance, that smells delicious when you have a shower. And so when you have that, when you become conscious of actually enjoying that sensation or that smell, that creates like a hormonal change within your mind and within your nervous system that's telling you that you're enjoying this. And that's what we need more daily, is like the little joys, like maybe it could be that you go outside and that you, enjoy the sun coming up. I'm sitting at 6 o'clock in the morning, but our sunrise is only just happening now, and it's one of my favorite times of the day because of the stillness, the clearness in the air, and the beautiful colors that come with the sun. It might be that somebody just has a cup of tea, that they might have their favorite herbal tea, and they just decide at some time in the day that they just want 10 minutes for themselves to sit in peace and drink their tea. Excuse me. And so that would be the first suggestion.
Mm-hmm. What you said, Sharon, it really, brings it back to presence and peace, like something as simple as savoring the scent of a sour gel, which you said, it becomes a moment of self connection. And I too feel that in a world of uh, that constantly, pulls women in every direction, that gentle act of appreciation just for yourself without needing to explain or justify it can be revolutionary for sure. And I love that how you frame that joy as something small yet deeply meaningful. It's not about grand gestures, but about like turning into those little details that remind us we are alive, deserving, and worthy of care. That's such a beautiful reminder.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, so how do you define true nourishment in a world filled with surface level self care advice?
So I actually woke up this morning and realized that I this thought came to my mind about, again, I suppose, how fragmented or disconnected, I guess, like you say, this whole approach to our wellness has become. So, if you think about, if women want to lose weight, they kind of go to a personal trainer, or they'll put themselves on a diet, or they'll start walking. Um, if they've got some crisis that's within their life, they may start to kind of look into their spirituality, or they might go to a psychologist and have a chat. And I kind of just thought, when we nourish ourselves, um, I think it's really important that we look at it from a perspective of, we're not just nourishing one compartment of ourselves, we actually nourish our whole. So when you, for instance, eat your broccoli, or your vegetables, I think it's really important that you're not doing it because you're trying to lose weight, although that will be a benefit if you haven't been eating your vegetables, for instance. But it actually also nourishes your nervous system because of the elements within that. And because it then makes you feel better, if that makes sense. So that's how you nurture your, emotional system. And then you nurture your spirit, or your light, or I now talk about her being our goddess. Like, that's how I like to refer to your personal light. Because I think our light has been dimmed for so long. And so those feelings that you get from eating better and moving better and being outside in the sunshine and interacting with your girlfriends, for instance, and interacting with your family from a positive perspective actually starts to underline the emotional context of how you feel. Your body heals better when it's sleeping, for instance, because your nervous system isn't in hyperdrive. It actually will flick into your parasympathetic nervous system. So it starts to rest properly and digest your nutrients properly. And then obviously, as you're kind of like this healing process occurs, then your light starts to shine more. You know, your skin starts to glow and you start to feel better and you start to, like, your confidence grows and your resilience grows and your ability to articulate what you really want in life instead of just accepting what is given to you or feeling like you're compensating to something. And so therefore there's an underlying frustration and resentment is all part of the nourishment that we need to start to look at everything as a holistic process. And that, yes, you've got to work out how do I eat better for my body so that, you know, I'm eating the way my body wants to eat. But it's also, if I'm eating this way, this will actually make me feel better, which makes me think better, which makes me work better, which makes me, you know, shine better. And so therefore I radiate naturally, um, you know, to the environment that I'm here and that I have a purpose.
Mm-hmm. That really puts things into perspective, I must say. Like, real nourishment isn't about checking a box, it's about tuning in, as you said, slowing down and giving ourselves what we actually need, not just what looks good on Instagram. And I
Mm.
think a lot of people will feel really seen by what you shared.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, I know I'm a victim of Instagram. And I know, you know, like you see these things and you see these different girls that say, I did this and now I'm this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that sort of thing. And but you don't understand, you know, there's no conversation behind the scenes about those days where they don't want to do that and you know they're feeling very raw and they're feeling vulnerable and they're in pain. You know, there's no conversation about that. And so I think that the problem is that people then don't then venture into that, or when they hit that spot they stop because they feel that they're different to that person who's on Instagram, if that makes sense. And I think it doesn't really matter what your goal is, you know, or what you ultimately how you want to be or look, because I think it's an evolving impression that we live with, and I think that the sooner we start to reconnect to ourselves and what we think is important for us, the faster we'll understand that Instagram is purely just providing a vision stimulant. You know, it's that dopamine hit that people get that they kind of go, oh my God, that looks fantastic. And then you buy something, you know, or you buy into the gym membership and you buy, you know, and then you kind of have to do the, okay, well, that might solve your problem for a time, but you've got all this other work that you have to do underneath all of that, that you're completely unaware of. And I think that that's where the wellness coaching has a really good place to support people, because I think when you purchase these different products and then you start to fail, you give up and or you walk away and you just say it's not working, or I can't do this. And that's kind of where the coaching, I think, becomes valuable, because it sort of recenters you back into, okay, I think you need to take this, or maybe you need to step back and have another viewpoint. So it's just that helping hand, or that person's hand that you get to hold while you're walking through the mud, which, irrespective of whether you're choosing to change your diet, you're changing a different exercise routine, you're changing your lifestyle, you're changing your job, you're changing your relationship, you're changing, you know, your children may have moved out of home, for instance, because they're now going to uni or they're moving in with friends. You know, your relationship may have broken down. All of this change that keeps happening is going to happen anyway. And I think that we as individuals have to develop the resilience to sort of not want to stick our heads in the sand because it is too painful. Um, And so we look for these quick answers when in fact, really, your health and your wellness is forever. It's an evolving journey. And I think that if you can learn some tools as part of your toolkit that you take with you into your future, then that means that whenever there's a change that occurs, it just makes life a bit easier for you because you've done this, you've worked through really hard change and
Mm-hmm.
and you've made a difference in your own life. Like, yes, you made a really difficult decision, but once you get through that, you then kind of realize that I really needed to do that decision. But part of making that decision work is all of the other elements of, your how you look after your body and how you interact with people and how you see yourself in the morning is all part of that, if that kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yes, that's such a real and vulnerable share, Sharon. I mean, so many of us have felt that way, comparing ourselves behind the scenes to someone else highlight reel, and it can really quietly chip away at our sense of worth. And the fact that you're willing to say that I have been felt like a victim of that is incredibly honest, and I know that, I mean, it will resonate with listeners. And it really takes strength to admit that, and even more strength to start shifting out of it.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we are taught how to do that. There's lots of conversations I know. Certainly the things that I sort of work with and have worked on myself with, where, this literally sitting in the mud uh, is a context that I think is very cathartic when you give yourself permission to get there. But the problem is that
Mhm.
life is very busy and it means that women then have to take the conscious decision to give themselves the time and the space to do that. And they are only the people that will create that for themselves, if that makes sense, because you can pay a trainer to do whatever, but the trainer is not going to give you that space to say, so you're not feeling very well today? Like, okay, well, why don't we just change the exercise? But in fact, if you're not really feeling very well, maybe there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's kind of going on. Maybe you're starting to feel like this change is happening, but it's happening so quickly that you don't have the ability to stay with it. So your nervous system shuts down because that's what it's done all of its life, if that makes sense. So that's a protective
Mhm.
mode that we do. Um, and so you need the person, to be able to kind of go, okay, I've spent so much time sitting in my own mud, and I actually quite like going there now because it's kind of one of those things where you always learn something new about yourself. And once you resolve that, like the power that you feel within yourself is amazing because you're kind of like, it's like this massive aha moment that you kind of go, oh my God, this was never my fault in the first place. This is
Mhm.
just purely how I've grown up or the environment that I've seen or my working environment interprets this particular behavior as this, and it just doesn't synergize with you anymore. So that kind of moments allow women or empower them to then move on to actually start to make decisions of what they really want within their life rather than just saying, I've got to eat salads for the rest of my life.
That makes sense. And that vulnerability is what makes your perspective so real and relatable at the same time.
Yeah.
Sharon, thank you for showing us that the most profound medicine often begins in silence, softness, and self honor. And to all our listeners, your emotions are not your enemy, they are the compass guiding you back to the wholeness. So let today be the day you choose presence over pressure and healing over hustle. Until next time, stay tender and true.